I think I'd like to first welcome you for the first of this term's series of talks. And again, I believe you all got a flyer for the upcoming talks for this term. One of the real pleasures of directing the center is having this opportunity to work with my colleagues and to invite people I would love to listen to and enjoy listening to. I know a couple of people coming this year, but it gives me great pleasure to say that tonight's speaker is an old friend from Egypt, and we meet in Paris. Last time we ran into each other.
By chance.
By chance. So it was a very nice opportunity. Mercedes Volait is, as I said, an old friend. She's been a research professor at the CIS since 2008. Her research focuses on the artistic connections and interactions between Egypt in particular and Europe in the field of architecture, antiquarianism, and design during the long 19th century. I won't go through the whole list, but for anyone working on 19th century Egyptian art scene, art collectors, museums, connections with with Europe, the Ottomans, Mercedes is the person to turn to. Her work is indispensable, prolific writer, fabulous publications, really beautiful books to hold and to enjoy reading. Well, today's talk is, for me, the first. It's a new topic. She surprises us every time. And she's not an unknown person to Cambridge at all. She has been here many times. So anyway, without further ado, I leave the floor to you and go and enjoy myself. Thank you.
So this is for moving the slides, right? Okay, so well, thank you very much, Khalid. I'm really happy to be here. All most familiar faces. Yeah, for me it's a good opportunity to share some aspects of my current research on art, trade, and consumption in Khedival Cairo. It's a topic for which I was invited to lecture in Leiden 2 years ago. The book was supposed to be just after. Of course, it's taking time, but well. So I'm currently finishing to write it. And Bayt al-Sadat, art at Bayt al-Sadat or Manzil al-Sadat will be a bit in the book as well. So part of the material I'm working with comes from the records and holdings of the Victorian Albert Museum. I was just talking about this with Denise, to which I have been associated as a research fellow during the past 5 years. And I will talk more about this tomorrow, but already we have an example since this watercolor is at the Victorian Albert Museum. The other documentation I'm using proceeds from a previous research I did regarding 19th century architecture in Cairo, based in particular on the extensive private papers of a French architect named Ambroise Baudry, who worked in Egypt from 1871 to 1886 as chief architect of a palace of Caliph Ismail, and he also worked for a group of French expatriates, all with official positions within at the Egyptian court. So this is a very specific milieu who existed in from 1868 basically until when the British came and all these people left basically. The private papers were interesting because there were more than 800 letters, mostly exchanged while he was in Cairo. There was also architectural drawings and photographs. Some were bought by the Musée d'Orsay at one point, or in Paris. and there was also the accounts of his activity. So it was really a very incredible source that we have very few examples of this kind of source for other periods or even architecture in Egypt. So through this, through the Baudry and the milieu of his patrons, I was further driven to a topic that I had previously encountered, which is art collecting, Islamic art collecting for that matter. But Baudry architecture and moreover his interior designs combine another dimension that I did not suspect, which is reuse. As a matter of fact, his creation intersected with Islamic art and architecture not only figuratively, but indeed literally so, through the incorporation of salvages in the buildings he designed, that is, of fragments of architecture and craftsmanship coming from historic buildings at a time when Cairo had become a gigantic site of rubble and ruins. So it was by complete serendipity that I was introduced to topics and issues barely touched upon for 19th century Cairo and completely absent from the literature, that is art collecting and salvages and how they were incorporated into architecture and in particular into interiors as well as demolition and rubble, kharab, something that I'm working now with Adam Mestian. Maybe some of you know him. He's also a specialist of 19th century Egypt. We are currently exploring this through an ongoing collaborative research on the making of modern Cairo, based at the French Archaeological Institute in Cairo. So thanks to Baudry papers, a new picture regarding modern it's fine. Exactly. It was not the. It was the wrong button. So thanks to Baudry paper, a new picture regarding modern architecture in Cairo was taking shape. It was not typical colonial architecture, to use a common label, and it was not also typical architectural Orientalism, to use another one. It was not exactly determined by dynamics of social engineering and colonial governance. It was rather governed by the politics of personal leisure and pleasure, and by the logics, in fact, of beneficial investment of a specific social group, foreigners employed at the Egyptian court, so who had facilities at that time. For the brother of Ambroise Baudry came from a very modest milieu, but his elder brother was a very famous painter in Paris. His name was Paul Baudry. He painted in particular the decor of the Opera House. And he visited Ambroise Baudry in 1876. And he wrote to a woman in Paris a phrase that is fantastic because it perfectly encapsulates what is this about, which is Cluny Arabe. So the house, La Maison d'Ambroise, the house is a gem. We would be rich if this was situated in Paris. The doors and the ceilings, and actually this ceiling, came from, and the marble and the tiles come from palaces of the 16th century. It's a Cluny Arabe, an Arab Cluny. Most of you might not be aware of what is being meant by Cluny. It was one of the last medieval mansions left in Paris in the 1830s, where a keen collector of medieval and Renaissance art managed to rent a flat in order to display his collection in an appropriate setting. It was the beginning of what will be eventually termed immersive display. He worked at refurbishing the apartment with antiques, allegedly from the Renaissance, inventing in particular, well, you have it on the slide, the bedroom of François Ier, and of course this bed has been heavily studied recently, and it has nothing to do with François Ier, and it has nothing to do with Renaissance. But this site became a very popular attraction when the house was turned into a museum after the death of the collector in 42 and the purchase of the building by the state. And what was interesting, it was also a whole circuit after the visit. You could buy products that were copies of things that you had seen in the museum. The Cluny model became so fashionable that eventually it gave its name to a technique consisting in creating new furniture or new architecture with historic parts, and it was known à la clunisienne. Eventually, this decorative practice generated in turn the idea of the period room, a display device praised by museums worldwide during a large part of the 20th century, as well as by the rich and beautiful for their upscale homes, so Newport, Rhode Island, for those of you who know the United States, for example. In Cairo, that movement sustained the development of a thriving industry that still exists today, which is the dismantling of old structure for the resale of their parts. And their members, interestingly enough, define themselves as démolisseurs. So they use a French word for their trade. Of course, I was interested to know how the trade went in Arabic, and I was wondering if I could find it then in the list of guilds established by Ali Mubarak. No, démolisseur. So tonight it is similarly at the intersection of two historiographies that barely speak to each other, that I would like to talk about interior design and photography in relation this time not with French houses in Cairo, but with Egyptian ones. The two historiographies that I'm trying to connect and bring together here are, on the one hand, the history of photography and art, adopting Middle Eastern subjects, we can say the history of Orientalism in art and photography, and on the other, the social and cultural history of Cairo's nobility and notability, the Ashraf and the Ayan. Bayt al-Sadat, or rather Manzel al-Sadat, because Bayt al-Sadat is a family, rather Manzel al-Sadat, as it is identified in our text, is the house of the Sadat family, a prominent Sufi dynasty in Cairo. And it is an appropriate instance to try to bring those historiographies together, obviously because of the status of its inhabitants, but also because the house features in a number of visual and written records due to European artists, French and British in particular. We will show examples. And it is also described by Egyptian authors. The building also still exists, or better said, a small portion of it still exists, which allows materiality to be considered as evidence itself. So it was a huge house, only this is left now, and we will see more of it. And there is also a PhD that has been written on the family itself recently. So my idea was tonight was to share what I am inferring from this combined material, what I think it has to say about interior design and portraiture in, let's say, core Egyptian society during the reign of Khedive Ismail, that is before British occupation, since most of the material covers the year 1860s, 1870s. If you allow me, I would like to propose first a quick tour of the house in watercolor and photography. The residence of the Sadat was a very vast structure that had grown, by the way, it's in the south, I should have said this first, it's in the south of Cairo. For those of you who know Cairo, it's close to a place called Birkat el-Fil, in the south of the mosque of Sultan Hassan. So it was a vast structure that had grown, so this room were overlooking the, when they were still existing, overlooking the lake. So it was a vast structure of attached and detached apartments and rooms overlooking the orchards that extended to the shore of the Birkat el-Fil. The core of the house dates from the mid-17th century. There is a date on one of the walls, one of the left walls, and additions were made in I'm also confused with this, 1755, but the important transformation was carried at the end of his life by Shams al-Din Mohammed Abu al-Anwar al-Sadat, the 19th Khalifa of the Wafa'i order. And they are described in details by al-Jabarti in his obituary of Shams al-Din. Yeah, so these are the two passages I have used to try to make sense of all this material. So if we cross-check this account with the plan of the premises and other documents, two major interventions made at the time of Shams al-Din can be highlighted. So Shams al-Din is 1810s, let's say. He constructed new parts, and I have put them in red on the map. So Kat al-Ghazal, Kat al-Anwariyya, and the Musalla. And he reconstructed others by either modifying, so he modified al-Afrah, and he destroyed the Makad to put a Musalla in his place. So we will see a picture. And he also destroyed an old car to build Car al-Anwariyya, after his nickname Abu al-Anwar. And I also put a picture of this car al-Afrah in his condition today, because the house was recently restored and in a very, as you will see, in a very interesting way, because the layers of the house, the different layers of this room in particular have been made visible, so we can understand many things from it. So the prime addition to the house was the Kat al-Ghazal. So it was a square room overlooking the Birka on the two sides, and interestingly enough, it had a marble column erected in the middle of the room. And I will be very curious actually to understand the meaning, if anyone has a clue. Was it a matter of aesthetics? Was it a matter of structure? Was the piece structural, supporting, for example, the ceiling? Or did marble columns have apotropaic virtues at the time? I have no clue, but I would be very happy to hear you about this. The reconstructions focused, as I said, on three parts of the building. First, he made change to the most beautiful hall in the house, or Car al-Afrah, and actually is the only one who still exists today. The room dated from the building of the house in the 1660s. Its walls were all covered with gilded decoration, nukush al-dahab, possibly inscriptions, and what Jabarti calls el-ishani al-sini, which in fact is tiles, as well as polychromatic marble el-roham el-melawin. I presume that what is being meant here are the dadus in opus sectile, which was a typical thing that you would find in monuments in Cairo at the time. The Sheikh also enlarged, so Shams al-Din also enlarged the room over the adjacent courtyard, but in a manner that is not entirely clear. I checked the French version, I checked the British version, and I checked the Jabarti Arabic, and it's not more, I don't know, that is something that is not very clear. But he apparently transforms in some way this room. Secondly, he constructed another hall after demolishing the previous one, a previous reception room, a room with a central fountain. So this would be the drawing by Dylan representing this Car al-Anwariyya, or at least this is my hypothesis. And so this would be here. And in front of al-Afrah, he constructed a musalla. So I don't know if you can see it, but you have the mimbar here. So this is the little prayer place, and you have a map that was drawn of the house in 1868, and I will come back to this. So yeah, and Jabarti said this, so he destroyed the old Makad, which contained a column and arches, and this area he made into a mosque, complete with a pulpit for delivering sermons, and Jabarti said that in fact Shams al-Din did not want to go to the mosque of the neighborhood. He preferred to have his mosque at home. Yeah, so this description matches the photograph depicting that corner of the house. And also what is interesting, because I visited the house recently with two research assistants, and they measure the Qibla, and the Musalla is perfectly online, so with the measurements. So you can imagine that in fact all this part, which is on the same alignment, was probably all which was constructed by Shams al-Din. So this is the house today with this bizarre, very two short columns. So I don't know if the column that it was taken from elsewhere, but the case is that there is there a column, and this upper room is not mentioned by Jabarti. It was the upper car, and again we have a drawing, a watercolor by Dylan of that car. But to me, it seemed my assumption is that that part has to do with al-Afra, with the beginning of the first nucleus of the house, and not with the transformation. And you can note that again there is Islamic ties decorating the wall. Then apparently renovations were carried out in the 1860s, but this I'm less, we only have one reference about this, and I'm not very sure. If it was 1862, they would have been made then by Ahmed Abu al-Nas, the 21st Khalifa of the Sufi order, shortly before its death, but I'm not sure about this. He apparently went to a pilgrimage at that time, and I don't know. I think it was more likely his son, Ahmed Abdel Khalik al-Sadat, who succeeded him in 1864, but and in 1864, and again I have a problem with this, you will see he would have been 17 years old if the dates given in the booklet on the family of Bayt al-Sadat written by Tawfiq al-Bakri is correct. But again, I don't know, you will see, and I will be very happy to know what you think about this. So I need now to introduce you to this character, Abu al-Futuhat, as we will be seeing more of him in a while. What Sarah Nimes says of the very young man is quite informative of the new roles taken by the traditional elite under the Khedive, who had just accessed the throne of Egypt. So I'm going to quote what she writes. Like his ancestors, Ahmed Abdel Khalik al-Sadat studied with the prominent shuyukh of al-Azhar, including the Sheikh Ibrahim al-Sa'a, who was the khatib in the mosque. He also studied with Sheikh Mustafa al-Mablat and others until he went on Hajj with his father. He also took on the post of his ancestors. Although the Awqaf had been nationalized years earlier by Mehmet Ali, Ismail passed on to him all the posts and endowments that had belonged to his father when he became Sheikh al-Sagad al-Wafaiya. Also, like his great uncle Abu al-Anwar, so the man I showed you previously, he initiated his tenure as Khalifa with a trip to the ancestral Zawiya to go through the customary ritual of seclusion. At the same time, Abu al-Futuhat took advantage of the new kind of education offered at government schools. Besides his studies at al-Azhar, he also attended Al-Alson, the government school overseen by Rifai Tahtawi. There he learned Turkish, calligraphy, and arithmetic. So he was also appointed to newly created post by the Khedive. So he was supposed to be in 1864 appointed as a member of the Majlis al-Ahkam, if it's possible, at 17 years old, and a member of the Majlis Shura al-Kawin wal-Jamia. I don't know. he was appointed Majlis al-Ahkam, and what she says, Majlis Shura al-Qawanin wal-Jamia.
What is the year?
1864, he would have been 17 years old. You will see, it doesn't match also the photography. So this is why I'm bringing all this, because there is something going on here. So we now come to Monday, 7 December 1868, when the house was visited by two British artists, the interior designer John Dibley Crace and the photographer Frank Masson Good. Both men were 30 years old. And John Dibley Crace wrote an account of the visit for his mother, and again, it's quite interesting. So they were permitted to enter the house, and the donkey boy told that the man was an artist. So the sheikh, the young sheikh, asked them to take a portrait in drawing and photography, and both did. So Crace say that he painted a portrait of the young sheikh, and Frank Manson Good took a picture. And then, so he was very pleased, the young sheikh was very pleased. I think that the young sheikh is here, and the two Brits are here, and well, and the donkey boy maybe is this one. And so the young sheikh was very pleased, so he returned the favor by an invitation to share the sheikh table. So Craze goes on describing the meal and its setting. So it's a large circular tray on a small movable table, what we call the kursi, and chairs to sit at the table. So already it's a mix of the traditional thing and new chairs. There were spoons to serve the food, but the meat was eaten by taking the bone with one's fingers. And after the meal, the British artists were invited to rest on a divan and were offered English cigars, although according to Craig, they would have preferred the shibuk. So here we have really a mixture of Egyptian and non-Egyptian commodities and goods. In the same letter, Crace gives a brief description of the house, which he developed in a paper entitled On the Ornamental Features of Arabic Architecture in Egypt and Syria, that he read 1 year later at the Royal Institute of British Architects in London. And if you can bear with me, I would like to use a bit more of his architectural description. So the house is identified by Chris as that of Ibn Sadat, so it's not the father, it's the son, the head of one of the oldest Arab families of Cairo, and a rich man. He focused in particular on the grand reception room, al-Afrah, of which he states, from the ceiling downwards, the walls of this, and also of the other apartments, are lined with old Persian glazed tiles. So what Jabarti called Ishani al-Sini was called by the Europeans Persian, but it's Islamic. In any case, blue and green on a white ground. And Crace was wondering if it didn't come from Damascus, but this is another discussion. But the important thing is that the old Persian glazed tiles were covering the wall to within perhaps 9 feet or 10 feet of the floor, the total height being possibly 25 or 30 feet. But the important thing is the lower part of the wall is plain. In his letter, he observed that the room retains a considerable amount of the ancient decoration, although much has been renovated and badly. In particular, the walls are lined with old Persian tiles, and the rest is painted to imitate them. So I don't know if you can see it from here, but these are the Isniks, the real ones, and these are the painted, the facsimile Isnik. And again, this is something I had no clue, no one has written on this, but since visiting Bayt al-Sadat, I also visited older houses in Cairo, and all of them had these painted ceramics. So there was, and it makes sense. I mean, there was almost no Islamic tiles after, I don't know, 1750. So if you wanted a real Islamic tiles, you had two solutions: either take them from somewhere, and again, we have tons of examples of this in Cairo, or repainted them. And actually, it's very, yeah, it's a whole thing in itself, and something that could be studied. So yes, the few Islamic lefts and the painted ones and all the other walls of the room, it's a very huge room, are also painted with this tiles and of different motifs. And also what is really interesting is that so the room was restored some like 3 years ago by architect Tariq al-Mouri, and what is really interesting is that they allowed older layers of the room to be visible. So, for example, here it's a little trace. I mean, this was, they only left this, but it was the rest of the walls had this trace, and this trace, if you, I don't know if it's very visible, but when you see it, it's obvious. You could see the tiles, the trace of the tiles, so the tiles were here. They left a little bit of the traces of the tiles, so we can see what it was like. And here you have the Roham el-Melawan, in fact. So this is why I said that it was interesting to have in mind the fact that Jabarti mentioned this Roham el-Melawan, while Kreis, who visited in 1868, said that the Dadus were plain, so this was gone. So we can actually return to the watercolor that apparently Brian said is not in the good colors, but Malish. It is dated 1873 and is due to the British artist Frank Dillon. The image is a faithful description of the room, as can be proved by a picture that was taken 30 years later. So that you can see that this is not a fantasy of, all this is not a fantasy of Frank Dillon. Maybe the colors, I don't know, but you can see the same here, the same thing in the photography, and you can see the sofa, the divan, you can see the tables, you can see the Moreno glass. I mean, interesting assortment of things. So both images help understand what was going on since the first refurbishment of the place in the early 1810s, and this is also something that is visible when you visit the room, because again, Tariq al-Mouri has left part of what existed in the room. In fact, what happened then, I don't know if 62, 64, 68, oh, it was before 68, sorry. What happened then is that, so there was the painted Islamic, the real Islamic, and here it was wooden partitions that were painting with a matching, matching pattern, and in the process, they took out the salsabil, so there was water running here, and that was over. They took out the fountain, the face area was here, and they put a carpet with a kind of, large pattern rug, I don't know, flowers or something like that. So the face area was connected to the salsabil, both were disposed of, and I don't know if the Roham el-Melawan they already disposed of, but in any case it was covered with these partitions to have an homogeneous, in fact, decor, not with different type of material and colors. This is my assumption, so I'm assuming that this is for aesthetics reasons or practical reasons, because apparently the room was very humid, so maybe a carpet was more comfortable than stone, and maybe the dadus needed repair, and there was no one to, I don't know. But the point is that I think it's a deliberate decorative scheme that is reworking and adapting historical architecture to new conceptions regarding aesthetics, comfort, and distinction. We have to keep in mind that this room is where the ceremony specific to this Sufi order took place, so it was its public face. But as I said, similar refurbishments are encountered in other houses in Cairo, so it was not an individual fantasy, but rather a shared panel and a pattern, and it illustrates for me a taste or fashion typical of those years, the 1860s, a taste that combines some commitment to historic architecture with the adoption of up-to-date amenities and decorative ideas. For the last part of my talk, I would like to go through a few sets of photographs that were shot in the house. One is a portrait by Frank Masson-Good, titled Sheikh Sadat, very possibly the one taken at his request on the very day of the visit of Grace and Good to the house on December 7, 1868. I'm not sure you can see it, but in fact you can see that his overcoat has fur inside, so December makes sense. It's winter weather. Can he be 21 years old? Can he be Abul Futuhat? I don't know. So he's sitting on an imitation of a Chesterfield sofa, the quintessence of British design classic, with a shibbook by his side and an appliqué fabric typical of folk art behind him, bearing an Arabic inscription that we see in other pictures you will see, and maybe it was the motto of the Sufi order. It's Ya Muftah el-Anwar, Aftah lena Bab el-Jannah. You will see it in other, and Jerusalem Falls. So for me, it's a very interesting portrait. He holds a relaxed yet assertive pose that suggests some ease in front of the camera, though he's not gazing actually at it. It is an eloquent, significant pendant to the refurbished room, illustrating a concrete appropriation of modern technology and aesthetics in connection to one's own cultural heritage. It is consistent with the mixed education and the various social roles that he was supposed, that the head of the Wafayette was supposed to have been performing. The Sheikh, so pay attention to his cheek. The Sheikh appears in other individual and group portraits taken by the French photographer Émile Béchard. It is winter again, and again he has fur, he has fur on his overcoat. And this time he's wearing the official attire of the order, and so the robe should be yellow silk and large turban, and he's surrounded by books. The view may be part of a series that Béchard exhibited in 1878. And this is a difficult thing with this photography. It's not always easy to get the exact date. You have to, so if it's 1878, then he would have been, this would have been 10 years after the first portrait. So I was wondering, is it the same man? Well, he had this very marked shibboleths here, so maybe, but I don't know. There is something with the dates that do not work. There are further portraits, another one, again by Béchard. He obviously enjoyed photography, or at least opened easily his house to photographer. There is another portrait, and this we see the same man, that was taken actually on the same sort of little armchair, And in fact, in the same Bayt al-Sadat, because you can recognize the carpet is the same carpet, but behind him they installed this painted curtain. It was something that was common when you wanted to, I don't know what, some kind of background. You put these big painted papers. So the Sheikh this time is exhibiting all his decorations, and he posed in front of a painted screen, but still at his house. So he asked for a portrait in 1868. He was photographed in the 1870s. He again poses for an official portrait later on, because l'Occasion is later on. So it was sort of an habit to have to be in shot. I mean, to be portrayed in photography, and we have other examples of people at that time, and it was recurrent to go to the studio photographer. Well, the Sheikh was an important man, so he had a photographer coming at home. Béchar also shot in the courtyard numerous genre scenes and types. Some stage figures, such as that of the water carrier that we see here, for example, this one. So this one is by Émile Béchar. This is the door of the al-Afrah. So we can recognize where the photography was taking place. And this is the same man, again, as playing the water carrier, but by another photographer, Pascal Sabah. So I was wondering if it is as if there were photographic sessions bringing together several photographers that were organized at the house. Were the models brought by the photographers? Were they recruited among the personnel serving the Sheikh? Some individuals can be recognized across the prints. Well, this is another genre scene. There is the little Musalla behind. But for example, this man, so this shot is, this view is supposed to represent an Arab meal. Actually, it's interesting because we know that the Sheikh entertained the two British artists in a kind of different thing. But well, so this is supposed to be an Arab meal, and this is supposed to be a picture illustrating les docteurs de la loi, so ulamas. And in fact, you can recognize him here. And this man appears also in other portraits as well. Yeah, for example, you have him here, and here this time is, I don't know, public, écrivain public, public writer. So what is going on here? Is it business? Is it amusement? Is it an exchange of favors, as with the Sheikh early portrait? Open to questions. So to conclude and recap, I have tried to show tonight that visual and material evidence has potential not only for the discussion of issues of artistic or architectural authorship or patronage specific to art historians. My point is that images and architecture can act as historic records speaking to the social historian as well. In combination with textual sources, visual and material data can help uncover social and cultural realities for which limited writing is available, such as in the examples presented tonight, the attitudes of religious elite towards interior design, for example, or new technology in pre-colonial Egypt. The transformation of Manzil al-Sadat shows that interior rejuvenation and design was not the sole activity of concern of French expats in Cairo during the early days of the Khedival. With this instance, we have a testimony that parallel interventions took place in Egyptian homes, albeit with distinct perspectives. While historic salvages were looked for by French patrons, some were disposed of in the homes of their Egyptian counterparts, as in the case of the marble mosaics, the fountain, and the basin from al-Afrah. Getting rid of historic material did not mean the abandon of historic settings. It was a way to adjust to new needs and concerns. It represented almost the symmetrical attitude to what French expats attempted in Cairo, that is, accommodating historic fragments into new structures, while at Manzil al-Sadat, the issue was to accommodate modern fixtures into existing buildings. Aesthetics and comfort played the primary role in the process. It was not an economic matter for neither of them. French incorporated salvages into their homes for the touch of historicity and individuality they brought to their interiors. Egyptians incorporated imported fixtures and goods into their rooms for comfort and new lifestyles. The result was hybrid or composite in either cases, but demonstrates for me a willingness to host and adapt to novelty. It is worth keeping in mind that major changes had already taken place in the 1810s at Manzil al-Sadat, when a number of old parts were destroyed and reconstructed. Contrary to the images of architecture frozen in time provided by many a book on Islamic architecture, buildings are living structures that constantly change and transform. So what we have here is not an Ottoman house, as guides will have it, but the result of successive processes of transformation taking place throughout the 19th century. As for photography, the new technology born in 1839 is often considered a medium meant for stereotyping, and moreover for surveillance or indeed propaganda. We obviously have here some of the stereotyping going on with the types and genre scenes shot in the courtyard of the house of the Sadat el-Wafa'iyya. The photographic sessions needed to produce the views imply some social interactions between the photographers and the occupants of the house, of which we have an example with the meal for a portrait that took place in 1868, and it will be, for me, very interesting to know more about how this kind of co-production functioned. But my point here is that if we read these images against the grain of their actual setting and the actual individuals involved in, I think we can go beyond the explanation through the stereotyping paradigm. The earlier portrait of the Sheikh al-Sadat, besides concealing an enigma on the identity and age of the sitter, has also much more to offer in my view. It is the result of a proactive curiosity for the new medium, since it was made at his own request. It provides insights on his visual and material universe, thanks to the props stage. And more importantly, perhaps, it captures a moment of interiority or even melancholy that is also perceptible in later views that pertains to one individual and none else. A moment of truth, or is it embarrassment mediating by the glass plate? And this is my final word.
Thank you.
So can someone be elected at Majlis al-Ahkam at 17 years old? No.
Majlis al-Ahkam is the most prestigious legal body, and it's, usually the members would be in 1868 would be
1864.
1864 would be ex-army officers and provincial governors.
Mm-hmm.
But in the case of Abdul Latif Sufi, the son of Abdul Rahman Sami, this is under Muhammad Ali. Sufi joined Majlis al-Ahkam at 14, or at least his biography suggests and this is earlier, much earlier, obviously.
Age 14.
At age 14. And I mean, there is a sigil, but his sort of governmental sigil talks about
The reference, because I checked, I was wondering, I mean, this doesn't make sense that this man cannot be, what, 21? Can he be 21? The information comes from Tawfiq al-Bakri in his little pamphlet. In fact, it's the first page of the pamphlet where he said that Abu al-Futuhat was that age, etc., and that his father was dead died while doing the pilgrimage. And then this is how the young Ibn Sadat became the Sheikh. But probably the one possibility that in fact he was born 10 years before. So for example, here he will be 31 years old, which makes sense. And then he put on weight on the other pictures, and then it will make more sense. But there is a problem with the date. And 31, he could have been, he was the head of the Wafaya, he was one of the richest men apparently in town, so he could have been, right, at the Majlis al-Ahkam, or we don't know. Do we have lists of people at Majlis al-Ahkam? We have.
No, but you can compile one, so it's not impossible to find, to corroborate.
It's not impossible.
Maybe the same, I mean, just...
But it doesn't look like the same man.
Which, no, it is.
The three that you got later.
So this one,
they're clearly the same man, but the first
this one, and this one,
yeah.
okay, they're the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you go to this,
To the profile.
he had the same.
He's got a much longer face.
Yeah, but it was not. He's not plump. I don't know.
It seems like he has a habit of posing in front of this hanging, this tapestry.
Is it the same person or not?
I mean, it seems
We
like
can vote. I'm interested to know who thinks it's the same man or not the same man.
But do we know the date of this picture?
Yes, 7 December 1868.
So this is 1860.
And it's Sheikh Sadat. I mean, and everyone. I mean, everything is consistent, but maybe his face, although because he had this mark here that is quite prominent, and even the nose, I think, is the same. Yeah. It just he.
He's got a much rounder face.
Sorry?
He's got a much rounder face in the
Because he's thin. He's young. He's young and thin here. Well, I don't know, Sheikh Sadat, and I don't think. I mean, if you know, you see this photograph, you say, okay, they didn't understand, and they photograph anyone and put Sheikh Sadat. But we have an account of someone who is having lunch with this young guy, actually, who is here. So, I mean, there is, I don't know, there is something going on here. But my assumption is that it is the Sheikh Sadat, in fact. And it can't be his father, it can't be his uncle. I mean, yeah, I don't know. The family still exists, so I should ask, but they know nothing about the house. And they ask me questions about Manzil al-Sadat. But maybe they know more about their genealogy, or maybe there is a tomb somewhere, there is the mausoleum of the Sadat al-Wafaya, and we can, I don't know. I would be very interested to know, yeah.
So the picture with the ulama, supposedly?
Yes.
Yeah, I happened to receive just a couple of months ago, because a friend of mine who apparently wrote a little bit about, or is writing in her PhD about, is it Sheikh Mohammed al-Sadat's daughter, who was created, was a public scandal, so to speak, or not public, I mean.
It could be the one who married Sheikh Ali Youssef, the one of Rose Youssef. Yeah, he's the father of that girl.
Yeah, and he tried to get it annulled, right, because of the difference in social status, so to speak. Anyway, she assumed that this is the Sheikh himself.
Oh, she assumed.
She assumed, so she came across the picture. I don't think she realizes that there's a kind of question of the identity of the.
Okay. But she
so-
exists. She still exists. No.
No.
This is a scholar.
So
Oh,
this
sorry.
is a,
Oh, and he assumed. The
she-
scholar assumed.
So so basically a friend of mine who's I don't know exactly what she's researching, but she happened to bring this photo.
Yeah. And she
to
assumed that
attention
he-
because she came across it and then she realized that, oh, this is the Sheikh himself. But I'd be happy to actually put her in touch with you.
Yeah,
I think
I'd
she'd
love
be
to.
very interested to.
Yeah, and also what I was interested also is all these photographic sessions and all. I mean, you know, it's not once. It's coming on and on and on. So this house was open to photographs and artists. And I have another example in Cairo of a house that was painted by tons of artists with the Bayt al-Mufti. But there was one reason why that room was open to the artist. It was an abandoned room. They were not using the room. So it was open to anyone. Any artist who came to Cairo did a picture of the car of the Bayt al-Mufti. But he was not living in that house, and he had nothing to. It was just a ruin in a part of the garden, so it was open to artists. So, but here, you know, I don't know. I mean, and he himself even posing. So because one thing is to have your portrait done because you want a portrait, okay? But another thing is, you know, participating in this kind of stage. I don't know.
Thank you. There's a lot. It's amazing. One thing is when he's posing with his Ottoman medals.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know about this?
I can tell you that the Yıldız photography archives
Yeah.
has albums upon albums of provincial sheikhs
Ah.
with their medals.
Ah, so
exactly like this.
So maybe he did it to send
with
it.
that backdrop.
Ah.
Yeah, because it's a bureaucratic / romantic backdrop that a lot of them use.
Okay.
So if you have the opportunity to go to
It's a Irsika.
Irsika has the copies, the originals. It's best to go to Istanbul University. I mean, anyway, in any case, whenever you happen to be there, I will respond to the email. But there's another thing that I wanted to ask is whether he in fact used that space as a site for Sufi gatherings.
Yes. Al-Afrah. So.
So it is in some ways they are posing. I mean, they're role playing, but they're also in many ways not role playing and.
Actually, it's interesting because he's not posing in front of the door of al-Afrah. He's posing in front of the door leading to the harem. You will, and yeah. So again, you see the carpet. So you have the same carpet here, and again the same door, which is not the door of al-Afrah. So again, that's interesting. He's not posing in front of, but maybe it's a matter of light. He's not posing in front of the door of al-Afrah. He's posing under the door of the private parts of the palace. But maybe it's a light issue. There was more light in that part of the. I don't know what is going on. Something is going on.
I mean, you don't think that image there is a photograph of the important members of the convent.
No, I think this is a person. I don't know what you think, but I think these people are working for him.
So the household.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, maybe there is the one who is calling for prayer, and maybe there is one last picture I didn't show. I mean, I showed, but yeah. For example, here again. So he's posing here in front of this, and here you have the black eunuch. I can't say the word in English. Eunuch. So it's probably the private parts of the house, and you have all this, maybe there are scholars, I don't know, who maybe they were studying with him, I don't know. Yeah, and yeah. So, no, I think it was the household of the, you know.
And then my last question, I promise not to dominate, is whether, do you think that he had the desire for these photographs then to aid in portraits, in painted portraits? Or do we
Of him?
Of him.
I don't know
The
any.
water carrier, you know.
The water carrier,
yeah.
No, I don't think, well.
And the petitioners, the petition writers, for instance,
Yeah,
being such one of, I mean, whether they are posing a la Orientalist painting or.
No, this is typical thing that you put in an album for tourists, or either tourists to take back, say, oh, the Aramin, or for painters to use for their canvases. Yes, I think so. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, typical this, the dervish, I mean, this, I don't know, it has nothing to do with the, yeah, that's a complete invention. But this, yes, but what for me was curious is two different photographers photographing the same man disguised as a water carrier. So, and you have also the typical woman with the oranges and so, and also if you look at the light, it's not the same moment of, so maybe it was even, I don't know, there was this photographic sessions and it was, yeah, I don't know. I would love to know more about this, and were they doing it for money or just for fun? Just to have the foreigners, you know, having these things in their courtyards? I don't know. Or was it just a way to give more money to the persons working in the house, you know, so they were tipped for the pictures? I don't know. But there is another British artist who met with the Sheh, which is Walter Tyndale. So apparently he was open to artists, and in this, Walter Tyndale say that he was brought to the house of the old Sheh. He was old at the time. Was brought by a common friend, an Egyptian, and they. Walter Tyndale did not understand what was going on, and so the Egyptian friend was translating, and the Sheikh was quite amused by what, I mean, yeah, so the whole scene. So yes, I think there is some sort of interaction and, yeah, having fun going on here.
Do you know how these artists actually got an introduction to go into these houses?
Well, Chris is quite open about this. No, he was just told that they usually go to two houses, Bayt al-Mufti and Bayt al-Sadat. Sometimes, no, Chris talks about another one, Khalil. And they used to go and to ask if they could enter. Most times, but this is Egypt, and if you do it today, it will be the same. People do it. Fatalu, yeah, please enter. And then, of course, they're very happy to see you. I mean, to observe you. If you take pictures, they would like to know more about the cat. I mean, you know, it's. Yeah.
But it was only in the 60s that they were invited in. Earlier in the 50s, the 40s. Artists didn't seem to go into those houses.
No. Wait. Sorry. Bayt al-Mufti, the earliest drawing we have is 1848. So it's really early. It's a full watercolor of Bayt al-Mufti in 1848.
Right.
By a Swiss, it is published by a Swiss Bern artist, Theodor Zerleder. And Bayt al-Mufti have a whole series of and even Wilde, James Wilde drew a lot of houses in Cairo in 1844. before. So no, I don't think it was that difficult. But actually, Brian, my question even, I wonder if it's not, because this is a very bizarre view for an artist. It's more an architectural design. So I was wondering if it's Dylan who produced the pattern for the. He was asked maybe to do a view of what the room would be like once the partition, the wood would be installed. I don't know. I was wondering.
So maybe you think that Dylan is creating the pattern of the interior design.
Maybe not creating, but producing what it would be like once the partition. But I don't know. It's a pure speculation. But I was wondering because it's not really an Orientalist. You have two guys in a corner, but it's not the typical Oriental view with genre scenes.
No, but all the Dylans are like that with just one or two figures.
Well, but the other one, the one with the car, is more,
That is because that's an exhibition watercolor.
Okay.
Okay. So
And the other one?
the other one is just, I don't know why he did them, but
Yeah, but
this
the
is
question
for an
is-
exhibition.
Okay.
So it's much more worked up and much more Orientalist.
Hmm.
Because the series that's in the V&A, most of them, I think were done, we don't know why they were done. Dylan just was recording what he saw.
But I mean, why couldn't he have been sort of conceiving of a Prise d'Aven type?
No, actually, it's good that you bring Prise d'Aven. I have to study this, but apparently, the facsimile are copying motifs that are in Prise d'Aven. So, I don't know, something,
Does Priest then do Bayt al-Sadat?
He spoke about it. But he entered many other houses, so it's, no, I don't know, I mean,
I think he's just put the figures in for, because it makes it look more interesting. But the other one that you showed is definitely...
no, the other, yes,
was
but this
exhibited.
one is very bizarre, I don't know. Why is he showing, I mean, he's really showing the fact that it's not a typical house anymore. You don't have the fountain, you don't have the salsabil, you have this partition.
So he's projecting, he's showing...
No, either is, I don't know. No, I don't know, I mean, but I wonder what caught his attention, the fact that they had closed the room. I don't know, it's...
Do you feel any of the other watercolors by Dylan in the V&A are like that? Are something that are painting something that was going to be like that? Or
No,
he was
the only
painting-
one. For me, the only one which is completely different
Of
of
that
the others.
series.
Yeah,
Mm.
completely different of the others. Even the Carl Anwareya is yeah. This one is different. You have a woman in whatever. It's a kind of it's not that plain architecture.
No.
It's a kind of, I don't know. It has more volume, more. I don't know.
Well, Dylan knew Crace. I mean, he and when they must have corresponded.
Yeah, but we don't have a Dylan correspondent.
No, we don't. But
Okay, so-
they knew each other. They knew each other, and maybe there was some connection.
I mean, Crace is interesting because it's not very long letters, but he spoke about the models, so he had meetings with models, he could hire a model and through etc. So, Leighton was with him at one point. I mean, there is a whole group of people who were there in this December 1868, apparently. And it was not difficult to have a model, apparently. He had an appointment with someone.
I have a question. I didn't know what happened to the model.
Yes.
When was it torn down? It was mentioned by Jabarti.
Jabarti said that it was there.
Yeah.
And then Crace in 68 said that the wall is plain. After the ties,
Yes.
the wall is plain.
So it was taken off by that.
Yeah.
Can we see the picture of what Tarek Mouri
Yeah.
had? I was trying to understand the sequence.
Okay.
So the picture that you have here in the bottom right corner, this is
No,
not,
no, this is just, no.
this is
Yeah,
not
no,
from-
no, this is just for people who are not familiar with what is the mosaic. No, no,
I
this
thought
is another
this-
place. No, no, sorry, no, sorry, I should have told this. This is just to explain that the traces we see here are in fact the traces of this kind of marble. It was just an example. We don't have the, but interesting enough, for example, in Bayt Suhaimi, so the wooden partition, actually you can see it when you are in the room, you can see that there was a wooden partition because they cut it, but they left a bit, so we can see that it was there was all this structure that was put in the room. But what is interesting is that at Bayt Suhaimi you have this room like that where this is painted. So they imitated, so they took off the Ruham al-Malawan and they painted it to look the same. So I don't know what is going on here. Is it because it was broken and they could not repair it? Is it because it was too cold and painted wood? I don't know what happened. And Bayt al-Sadat, so you have the dado, which is painted like Ruham al-Malawan, and you have the upper part, which is painted as Islamic, and it's painted. It's yeah, painted as well, the whole thing. And in fact, now that I'm looking at this more and more, we find more and more places that were fully painted because in fact there were no Islamic ties. There were no production, so.
I have a question also about this,
Yeah.
and about the restoration project that
Yeah.
I came across Dr. Mori only a couple of months ago.
Oh, okay.
I've never met him, and
I don't know him
I
either.
don't know him, but there is a controversy happening in Egypt now, not about this, but about the Luxor moving the sphinxes from Luxor Temple to put in Tahrir Square.
Really?
It's a big story. And Dr. Mori stood
Against it.
against it.
Mm.
So people are, the reason I became familiar with his name is that people say that he should be the Minister of Antiquities.
Poor guy.
Exactly.
Poor guy.
And right now, we have this guy who's doing
Khaled
this,
El-Inani.
yeah, who's doing this amazing, crazy stuff. But
He's unbearable also. We used to know him because he was at the board of trustees of the IFA. We know him well. Anyway.
Apparently, but this looks very professional.
It's incredible. It's incredibly nice. It's incredibly nice. It's a fantastic restoration. Apparently, they're doing more and more of this.
So he's part of what? Is this his own, I mean, he must be commissioned.
He's commissioned. He's commissioned.
By the Ministry of...
By the Historic Cairo
Yeah.
initiative.
But he has his own private?
He has his own private firm. And he won the offer. I mean, they publish offers, and you reply, and probably he has a very good reputation.
Yeah.
So probably he produced the nicer, etc. And yeah, no, it's very, very. And then after that you can discuss. I mean, for example, the Fas'iyya, what kind of reference. But yeah. So, but for example, this again. For example, this
Yes.
he opened this on purpose to show that there was a window there. So his idea, as I understand it from the room, is that he left apparent, visible, all the layers of the room.
Yeah, and
So this is really
it's
good.
enabling you to think and engage with him, which is fantastic,
Yeah.
because this is not what is done typically in the restoration projects in Egypt. I mean, from the little I know.
It's getting better, and it's more and more, and you have people who understand these kind of things. For example, at Bayt al-Azaz, also now that I'm interested in painting and facsimile tiles and etc. At Bayt al-Azaz, they also left part of the wall with painting. for example. No, they're doing it more and more. They're doing it more and more to preserve the different layers.
Can you go to the first portrait of him?
The 20,
this one?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'm not an, I just venture some my own reading of the posture, this posing and posing in front. This, compared to the subsequent ones, appears to be, I mean, he's much more in control.
This one?
Yeah. And much more relaxed.
Yeah.
Much less, I mean, I think you're trying to ask the question of how can we characterize the relationship between these photographers and the sitter, and are these models, and the other ones, who's in a sense in control of this session. And of course the question about the medium, which you asked at the end. And this is of course a fascinating question, because it happens to be a question about Orientalism and Europe and the fact that, as we know, these become very stylized and posed for an audience elsewhere. This pose I haven't seen before.
Right.
And whether or not it's the same person as the subsequent pictures, as it happens, is also, I mean, I'm imposing my own understanding of this period of Egyptian history, because I make the tentative argument that something snapped in the relationship in the 1880s. I mean, very vaguely put. From my own non-artistic reading of this period, I sense within Egypt, but I don't study these people, I study bureaucrats.
Well, he was a bureaucrat as well.
Probably, yeah. So if he were a member, in fact, of Majlis al-Ahkam, there's something, the Majlis al-Ahkam in particular, when I read their letters, and there's an amazing degree of self-confidence and comfort and pride as well. Not pride in front of you. It's not, the audience is not really European. But by the 1890s, it's like we're in a different world. It's, and of course, in my 20th century, it's of course different completely. So it's interesting that when I saw this, I mean, up to the 1860s, one can still capture this feeling of self-assuredness and self-comfort and also confidence of the future. Of course, I think this is what characterizes the shock that happened in the 1880s when the occupation takes place and when they had to grapple with the shock of what had happened to them. I mean, again, I'm talking about bureaucrats. It has nothing to do with Islam and culture and identity, and it's just so for me there's a big difference that I kind of sense between this picture and, I mean, this photograph and the subsequent ones, where it becomes, where I think he loses control of the session. That's
he loses.
That's my reading.
In this one?
Yeah, here he's a subject of someone else's composition. That's my reading of it. That's what I...
Yeah, I agree. I fully agree.
And he's become recognizable, stylized, or official, but this is something
there is
amazing
something,
in this one.
And no, I fully agree. I fully agree.
And it's not only the face, it's just the whole
Yeah.
body
Body language,
whatever
yeah,
one
yeah,
calls
yeah.
it.
Yeah. No, no, and this is what makes the thing, and even the little account that we have by Chris, you can picture the scene, and again, you can see that he was enjoying having a meal with this, Brits. Came to his house, and he showed them around. He gave him the fact that he gave them English cigars. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So he's paying attention, and of course they prefer the shibuk. But for me it's fantastic. It's really the whole thing is there. And the fact that he had his chairs to sit in it while the Beshar put the Arabic meal. People, I mean, so I agree. This is what I found very interesting in this. And the fact that he or his father or whoever, partition. I mean, really constructed the whole room as well, which is where they had these sessions where they were giving the names to the members, apparently.
And what is, again, excuse my ignorance, I don't know what a maq'ad is. I mean, I know visually what it looked like.
I was going to put
but
you...
what function?
It's a kind of pre-mandara. So you sit up. It came from Mamluk, all Mamluk house, but also later houses have it. If you enter a courtyard on your horse, for example, so you're at the level of the master, and the master will be sitting, is a kind of a diwan, and you are dressing him.
And it's elevated.
It's elevated. It's always elevated. And you are dressing, and under the makad you have rooms for storage, things like that, and you are addressing. So that's one function. And normally they. Sorry.
Bayt al-Qadi still has it.
Yeah, but al-Qadi still has it. You see it, the big makad. But some were a little smaller, and also they were overlooking the north. So at night you had the little breeze, and so it was cooler than other rooms because but yes, it's you deal with people, people I don't know, bringing something into the house, asking for favors, asking for money.
And he removed it. And
no, he destroyed it.
He destroyed it and built the masala.
The masala,
in its place.
yeah. And the students, she told me, oh, it's perfect, Qibla, whatever. She has because she wants to know where to pray, etc. I mean, how, yeah. And so she has it with her, and she measured and says, hey, it's perfect Qibla. I say, great. So.
It's a compass.
Yeah. So yes, the makad would have been here. And he destroyed it completely. He built the musalla and then rooms upstairs.
And those are the private parts of the house?
So
are they the
No, they're not. This is storage, and actually there is also little Dylan protocol that I think concern this part. No, the private parts are inside.
This direction.
Well, if I go back to the map. So the makad would have been here. So you enter here. You have the courtyard. You have the column with the car upstairs. Then you have al-Afra. This is the big courtyard, and then you have the musalla, and before that the makad. And then you enter from this door to the apartments.
This is this door here in the picture.
Yeah, this one is the one here. So since there is the black unique here, I suppose that this one goes to the harem, and also you have the curtain.
And is that where they posed?
Yeah, interesting. Not in front. They don't pose in front of al-Afrah. It's only the Orientalist Jarsin who are in front of al-Afrah. They pose here. I don't know.
There's some-
Maybe, but you have there is a reason. First the light, and then you have the tree. You have the big tree. So maybe it was more I mean, so the north will be, no, the north, yeah. Look, the Makkah is exactly in front of the north. So you capture the north. Yeah, yeah. And so this makes sense. It's west then. Sorry, no, it's east. It's east. So east morning. Yeah. Yeah. And he had his own library. That was a maktaba.
Was there a private, another spot in Cairo for the Sufi?
Yeah. They had another house. They had a lodge. Yes, they had one, and they had another house. They had several houses.
Okay.
Yes, the Zawiya was in town, and they had a house on the island of Roda, and this was another.
You know, in the Ottoman scenario, and for very wealthy bureaucrats with massive homes, those homes also hosted people. The people lived in them, you know, other people lived in these houses. So I wondered if, if the members of the lodge also resided there, and so there was.
No, because the Zawiya is not there, the Khanqa is not there, and the cells are not there. Because I know another case in Cairo, which is Bayt al-Damardash. And Bayt al-Damardash, you had the Zawiya, the courtyard, the cells of the Sufis, and the house of the Sheikh. But here, no, I don't think.
Could I just ask, I know it's late.
No.
But it was such a rich paper, but I want to go back to the very beginning when you talk about salvaging architectural elements, because this is also, maybe there'll be time tomorrow as well to discuss it, but do we know about the way in which things were classified? Were there people selling these? It's a huge subject, I'm sure, but I didn't realize.
They're still selling them.
Yeah,
They're
no,
still
of course,
selling
makes me
them.
think of Greece as well. I mean,
Sorry?
every place has, in Greece too, they have a way, different people sell different reused materials as well. And so, at this time, was there already a certain different categories of who would sell different sorts of reused materials, whether they were reused wood or the columns and the tiles?
Well, reuse is a practice almost as ancient as Egypt.
Yes,
because it has
exactly.
been,
Your point is
going
very.
on. What is interesting, actually, you will see, I will say something about this tomorrow, we have a colleague, Guylaine Malone, who took interest in the topic, and she's collecting cases where, because the point, I mean, the question is this legal or illegal? Our assumption is it's legal, and even from an endowment. So a waqf can be dismantled and its parts resold if, for example, the house has lost its ceiling or the doors. So it's not full. It's not a wall anymore. So then the parts can be taken. And then Muhammad Ali, for example, he needed, Jabarti tells stories about this because, for example, when Muhammad Ali needed material, he used to demolish house, and I mean that were crumbling, yeah. So again, it's totally. I had no idea about all this, and it's a fantastic topic and worth a PhD.
But it made me think too, this process of them starting to imitate the facsimile, the repetition, whether there was any moment when you know that that building was actually derelict. Did the family move, or was there a moment when it wasn't as occupied, or there was a particular historical reason why things came apart a bit, and then they wanted to keep it in the same style somehow, but maybe that would somehow explain this,
I mean, yeah.
the sameness, but in a different meaning. The desire to keep it somehow connected to the way it was.
I don't know, the fact is, European, in particular British furniture came quite early on in Egypt, 1840s, 1850s, and in Damascus as well. And the idea to have a à la franca was something that would appeal to people. Maybe they were, just, I don't know, they had enough of old things and they wanted to renew. But these wooden partitions, for example, also I had no idea. And now that I'm paying attention, I see them everywhere. So.
Yeah, when you said Leighton, I mean, something clicked because the car looks, Leighton's little space looks so much like that car.
Yeah.
And the irony that Leighton's entire atelier is covered in these tiles from top to bottom, whereas this one
Yes, exactly.
is it has lost all its tiles.
Yeah.
So it's
Yes.
covered.
I think there were much less tiles in Cairo than in Damascus. In Damascus, and again, this is a question why Damascus has so much tiles and why Cairo almost had none. Maybe Damascus was much richer at that time. But in Cairo, even, for example, in most of the Ottoman civils and etc., you have only broken tiles. You don't have
Damascus had kilns, right? They had kilns.
Yeah.
They produced
Yeah.
these
Yeah,
tiles.
exactly.
There's
Yeah, in Cairo apparently, we haven't found any kilns for now, so, yeah. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you very much.